I think it's important in our hurry, check things off the to-do list world to understand that when we're in the process of trying to digest all of this research, it's not a fast process. And it's okay that it's not a fast process. It's okay.
You're listening to the Happy Doc Student Podcast, a podcast dedicated to providing clarity to the often mysterious doctoral process. Do you feel like you're losing your mind? Let me and my guests show you how to put more joy in your journey and graduate with your sanity, health, and relationships intact.
I'm your host, Dr. Heather Frederick, and this is episode 57. In this episode, I welcome Dr. Jen Robinson. Jen received her MA in Applied Linguistics and TESOL from Ohio University and her Ph.D. in Education from Washington State University. She has over 2 decades of experience as a K-12 and university English as a second language teacher. She has served as an adjunct for Concordia University, Lakeland College, and National Louis University. She is currently an associate professor and lead faculty at the University of Arizona Global Campus, which is where I met her and had the privilege of witnessing firsthand the magic she can work with doctoral students. While she claims Washington/Oregon is her home base, she has lived in many states as well as England and Germany. In fact, today she's calling in from the UK to share with us some incredibly practical information about note-taking. Now, before we jump in, I do want to acknowledge that the sound isn't the best on this episode. There was something going on with my internet, and as you can tell, I'm recovering from a cold, but the information Jen shares is so important. I really hope you can listen past these minor things because what she has to share is simply game-changing.
Jen, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I was so excited when you said you wanted to come on and talk about note-taking because I know as a chair, there's 2 areas where I really struggle with mentoring students. And one is just at the very beginning, getting that viable doctoral level idea. And then the second area is that chapter 2. So today you're going to talk to us about note-taking and how do you organize all this massive amount of information so you can process it.
Yeah, that's one of the things when we do in residences with students or we're meeting to talk to them about their project. One of my questions is always, do you have a good system of note-taking? And then their response is, what do you mean? Do you have a systematic way of taking notes? You're going to, over the course of the next few years, read hundreds of articles. And there's no way between being a parent and carpooling and bake sales and coaching that you can keep all of that in your brain. And so that's how we evolve into note-taking. And that's the biggest support that my students ask for is how do I take notes?
And it would be so great if early on in the program, students were told, hey, let's check out your note-taking and let's practice it and then do this for a couple years because when you get to that stage where you're working on actually writing your dissertation or doctoral project, things are going to be so much easier for you. I know that there's been students that I've worked with that are just so quote unquote easy to work with. They seem to have everything organized, their writing really flows, and I'll ask them, what are you doing? And they will say things like, well, really early on the program, I started different folders, or I use this online organizational system. And so it's really easy for me to find things that I read 2 years ago that are relevant now.
Absolutely. I was thinking earlier today how I would start with this obsession about note-taking, and it really is almost an obsession. And I remember back in 6th grade, when I was a kiddo, I moved quite a bit because we were in the military. And I remember sitting in yet another brand new classroom in another brand new school. And I remember the teacher saying, to be successful in life, you have to be a good note taker. And my 6th grade self was just like, what does that have to do with being successful? And she was absolutely correct. And it's not just note taking, it's systematic note-taking. And I was just doing a little bit of research, trying to figure out how could I convey this. And there was an article by Moorhead in 2019. And his name comes up quite a bit when we're looking at note-taking and research. And he said that over half of the students in the study that he did had never thought of how to take notes. It's just something you do when you go to college. So often we talk about the hidden curriculum of college, and note-taking is one of these pieces of hidden curriculum to how to systematically take notes. And so it goes on a little more about just rereading what we've written. Oftentimes, students will read an article and then they'll write a few notes down. And that's awesome. That's great. And then there has to be another step, though. How do we get that information that we've written down into long-term memory so that 2 years from now, we can recall that information? And that is where systematic note-taking comes in. And in that same study, one of his conclusions that over 60% of the students in that study had wished they had better ideas for taking notes. It really can be a game changer to have such a systematic system for taking notes.
So it seems so simple. It's almost like breathing. Just like there are more efficient ways to breathe and get oxygen into your body and have a physiological response, there are better ways to take notes.
Right. And Sloan Thompson in 2020 followed up on Moorhead's study and found that it is a skill. Note-taking is a skill, something we have to practice, we have to perfect, just like any writing that we do. And doing that yields higher performance and it yields higher achievement. So something so simple, how we take our notes, can yield this higher achievement that my teacher told me about a billion years ago when I was in 6th grade. And so I think about that. And then I think about how I took notes. And so I have 2 stories. One is a doctoral student who came in, and just like you said, this student just whizzed through chapter 1, whizzed through chapter 2. And so finally I just said, tell me your secrets. What are you doing? She said a couple of things. One was she read an article every night, just one article every night. By the end of the year, she had 360 some articles read. Isn't that impressive? Just what? And then she said, I took notes. I used a synthesis matrix. I went, that's how I take notes. That's how I survived graduate school, was the synthesis matrix. And reading her writing was just it's a pleasure every time I get it. And it's taking notes on one article a night. So maybe 40 minutes a night, reading the article, just taking down some notes. Then I have another student who is not so good at taking notes. The student will read articles, and gets lost in the information. And so when I ask about the solid note-taking system, there's not really a good description. So if you cannot explain your note-taking system, let's work on making it something explanatory. Let's work on really making it a system that works for you. And there's not just one system that works. There are multiple ways we can do this.
So if you can't explain your note-taking system, you might not have one.
Exactly.
Right? So that's a question for everyone to ask themselves right now. How would I explain my note-taking system? Now, you mentioned a phrase, synthesis matrix.
Yeah, that is what I use. And the interesting thing is I never knew that's what I was using until I started teaching in higher education. But it's this idea that when we're thinking about our topic, we typically have 2 or 3 really big ideas. And so in my dissertation, it was English as a second language, middle schoolers, reading engagement, and flow, which has come up several times on the podcast. I love when I hear Csikszentmihalyi High and flow and just, I know about that. But I would put those 3 at the top. So let me step back. It's almost like an Excel spreadsheet for note-taking. You can do it on the computer. You can do it by hand. Either way, I use Post-it notes across an entire wall. But on that Excel spreadsheet, you have to imagine you have multiple columns going across. And the first column is going to be where you put the APA citation of your article. The second column then is going to be where you put notes. Your third, fourth, and fifth column then, each one would be related to the topic. So reading engagement, English as a second language, and flow. Whatever topic that article connects with, I'm going to put notes in that area. After a while, after I've read and I've taken notes and I get down to my 100 articles, I will be able to look at one column at a time, and I can take all of that research relating to English as a second language, middle school readers, and I can write all about that because I have it all laid out in this one column, or in my case, one big line of Post-it notes down a wall.
I love that. I'm just envisioning the room that you were working in.
It was the basement of my house, and one entire wall was my dissertation synthesis matrix, Post-it notes with duct tape to keep them, because by doing it that way, I was able to move them around. So sometimes I would just stare at it for a while, because a lot of what we do is head work when we're looking at our information. And so I would move things around and I would think, oh, but this would go better under flow, or this would go better under here. And if you have a system like that, you can easily move things around and make them work. It's really a nice way to be able to visualize the research and not feel so overwhelmed by it, because you can isolate, by doing a synthesis matrix, you can isolate that one topic of the Venn diagram that you're studying and write all about that one topic.
In an earlier podcast, Dr. Fisher shared that she used different colored note cards that she could sort. And I think it's interesting. I did it old school as well. I did mine on paper. I know that more and more people are using electronic means, and I know there's a search function, so it makes it really fast. But I also think you need to do what feels best. If you're listening to this, one of your goals here, one of your tasks will be to ask yourself, which one makes most sense to me? For me, learning new electronical systems sometimes cause me stress. So I would prefer the sticky notes or the note cards. But for others, that may sound horribly overwhelming, and they want the efficiency of an Excel spreadsheet. And basically what you're offering is a framework that can be done either old school, write it out, or electronically.
Exactly. And it doesn't matter. I was looking up that research because I figured one question that would come up is taking notes on a computer better or doing it by hand better? Because we know that debate. And there's not a conclusion to that yet. It depends on the person, just like you said. Some folks who take notes on a computer do not do as well in achievement because they're already someone who's distractible. It's Christmas season, the time we're recording this, and so I was sending off emails and then checking Etsy to see if they had a specific Christmas gift. So those of us who are already highly distractible, using a computer just adds to the distraction. However, if you're someone who can isolate and be able to take notes on a computer, go for it. That doesn't matter. It really is being able to systematically organize all of these hundreds of articles that you have to read. And it can feel frustrating for someone to read an article and just get a line or two out of it. But if they've read 100 articles and each article has a line or two of useful information that's in the synthesis matrix ready to go, that's a game changer. Now they're able to just sit down and confidently type out that section without having to reread and reread and reread and reread.
Yeah, and as you're talking, I'm thinking some of the other benefits of having it this way would be the ability to quickly put your hands on some information that a committee may be asking for. Is there a statistic you can put here? Can you add a little bit more in this section? And boom, you're not overwhelmed by that request of going, I've got hundreds of articles. How do I figure out how to address this feedback? You just go to your matrix, find that column, and you're like, I'll pick one of these.
Exactly, because you already have that APA citation of that article. You just move over to the line. If you're in an Excel spreadsheet, we're just going to use that as our visual. And it's right there. And it's really nice for students when I say you put the APA citation here, then you just go back and grab it and stick it in your paper. It is literally that easy. So it's just these little hidden secrets to how we can collect all of this data. And it's not really a hidden secret. It's just, I think, something we don't think about. When I'm meeting with doctoral students, they're excited about the research. They're so excited about getting their capes and tiaras and changing the world. And that's desperately what we want for them to do. This portion is though proving we can do it. And so before we can get the capes and tiaras, we have to do all of that literature review. So I remind them that if we look at 100% as a number, 60 to 70% is reading the previous literature. It really is. And if you think of that 60 to 70% of time, how are you going to organize that efficiently around kids and life and spouses and everything else you have to do? So the student who had already came in with this beautiful matrix, whipped through her first 2 chapters. It was incredible. I was so proud of her, and I wanted to take all the credit as her chair. Look how wonderful she's doing, shine the light. Really, it was her systematic note-taking system that she was able to explicitly explain to me in 5 minutes.
And, you know, my experience was similar. We would be on a phone or a Zoom call, and I'd say, hey, we could expand this section. How many articles do you have in that general area? And she'd be like, oh, hang on, I can tell you. I'm like, you can tell me. Most students can't answer that question. And so I learned, it was interesting. You said, you know, as students, you come, here you are in a doctoral program, you're ready to get going. And as faculty, so maybe you're not thinking about note-taking, your note-taking skill or lack thereof. And as faculty, here we are, look, you have a master's degree, you're bright, you're at the top of your class. A lot of times nowadays, doctoral students have a successful career already behind them. Normally, we don't stop, I think, to say, hey, let's check in with your note-taking skills.
Yeah. And research shows such a clear correlation between achievement and systematic note-taking. And it feels to us so basic at this level, but it is correlated with achievement. So it makes sense that we say, tell me about your system. How can we make it work for you? Where are the gaps? Where can we tweak a system to make it work for you? And I tell my students what works for me. And then I say, this may not work for you. You may have to come another way. But I pull out, I still have my giant concept maps that I had across the opposite wall of all of the Post-it notes of my synthesis matrix. So I can show them how I was connecting all of those dots. So I think if we can share how we were successful, that's going to give them a heads up on this very seemingly simple thing that is positively correlated to achievement and high grades and success.
And I love when there's profound impact with something that's really simple. There's already so many things about this process that are complex. And here we are, Jen's offering you listeners, here's a simple way that can absolutely impact the way you move through your program. And, you know, as you were talking, I was thinking the sooner the better, because you may need to try out a few different methods to find the one that works for you. Right. And also along those same lines, don't start something, don't start an Excel spreadsheet. And if you don't feel like it's working,
right,
give up.
Yeah, I've tried the Excel spreadsheet. My husband's in finance and he's an Excel spreadsheet maestro. I mean, that man can whip up an Excel spreadsheet like no one else, but that doesn't work for me. I'm someone who's very kinesthetic, which is why I have you can't see it behind me on the wall, but is a synthesis matrix of Post-it notes. And it is the APA citations down one side, my main topics across the top, and then each note has the notes of the article on it under the specific heading it goes with. And then when I'm ready to sit down and write, I take those notes off the wall and I set them beside me and I just type from those. It is so quick.
And you know, another bonus tip is if you are summarizing that article in your own words, then you're also getting one step ahead of potentially that whole text matching, quote unquote, plagiarism issue of not just using what the other author said verbatim, right? If you're already taking notes and putting it in your words, then by the time you sit down and write it and you're tweaking it, there's really no risk.
There isn't. And the act of putting that, for me, the kinesthetic, putting that Post-it note on the wall gives me a moment to look at all of the other things I've already written that's in that category and think right there, how is this fitting in? And then maybe I need to adjust how my Post-it notes are laid out in that column. It gives me that very specific intentional time to think about, well, this is something interesting. Oh, this confirms something, another Post-it note I already have. Or, ooh, this is something I would never have thought of in this category. It's called a translation hypothesis. Believe it or not, there are actual hypotheses about note-taking. And it's just the brain needs that time for that mental translation between the information we're taking in and how we're going to use it. So a synthesis matrix gives us that time to take that information in, sort of, as you talk about, you do breathing exercises, sort of breathing in that information, holding on to it for a few seconds to figure out where it fits in, and then exhaling it out into my document or into my Post-it note or my Excel spreadsheet or whatever I'm using. And it really helps the brain format and synthesize and translate the information into how we're going to use it.
Faculty will often say, work on your dissertation or your doctoral project every day. I'm a big fan of counting self-care as that. You gave a great tip at the beginning about reading an article a night. But I know with my old school way, I had a spiral binder, and there were days I couldn't bear to write or get in the library. And what I would do is sit down with a cup of tea and I'd read through my notes I had already taken. And I would gain such insight having had that space and then just reading it over and over. And it really helped me feel prepared for my oral defense. And I've asked students who have just nailed their oral defense, knowing references off the top of their head, how did you prepare for the questions? Of course, you know your presentation, you can prepare for that. And they said, because I took my notes and I read and reread and read my notes. So this becomes an archive of everything you've done over a number of years that you need to draw on at that culmination, that capstone event of your oral defense.
Yeah, I love that. I forget who did the book about habits, but I think he brings up elastic habits. I love the elastic habits around note-taking because there are going to be nights where I'm so cognitively overloaded that I can't possibly read one more piece of literature. I mean, after I graduated, it was 6 months before I could read anything, quite honestly. But I'll tell my students, if you can't write, you've set your goal for at least 4 days a week, you're going to write for 2 hours a night. I'll say, well, what are you going to do on those nights when you just can't? When you just can't? What are you going to do on a night when you just physically, mentally are drained? And those elastic goals are perfect. So an elastic goal for note-taking could exactly be that. I can't possibly read one more article. My day's been whatever, but I can stare at my wall for a few minutes with a cup of tea and really think about what I've done. And wow, what a great affirming and validating thing that is to be able to look at that wall and think, I've done a lot. I can take tonight off and just care for me and my brain.
And I think sometimes students will forget how much they have done.
Yeah. And so the student who's taken all of these notes, she was able to show me her binder over Zoom. This is my synthesis matrix. And I mean, it was a 2-inch thick binder of her synthesis matrix. She was handwriting it out. And I just thought, that's my people. That's how I do it. And she could, just like you said, go back and say, give me a day or two to look back through and I can tell you what I have about this or that. Or one of the emails I got from her was, I've looked back through all of this and I've noticed I'm leaving out XYZ. And I thought, wow, that is exactly what that is about. Because when you have it all there, you can see the gaps. If you're reading an article and trying to rely on your memory over a year of reading, it's going to be so difficult, so stressful, so overwhelming. It's already an overwhelming enough process.
There's a lot of reassurance and kind of this idea of, I feel calm and at ease with thinking, oh, it would be in my matrix. I can just go look in my matrix. I don't have to hold that fact in my head.
Right. And even preparing for this, I can show you my notebook. I did exactly what I was going to explain. On one side, I have my APA citations, so I can very quickly go back to my library folder and find them if we need them. It's something that comes natural. And there are some great apps. There's an app I use called Liquid Text on my iPad. And so I do go back and forth. I do not use the Excel spreadsheet because that's just not the way my brain works. But on Liquid Text, I can stack multiple articles, take notes and make connections. And if I click on a connection, it automatically goes to all of the articles that have that connection. So once I've taken those notes on my iPad, I do take that extra step and then write all my Post-it notes out. So there might be a space where there are multiple steps for note taking. And I think it's important in our hurry, check things off the to-do list world to understand that when we're in the process of trying to digest all of this research, it's not a fast process. And it's okay that it's not a fast process. It's okay.
And I think that is such an important point. This takes time, but you can be more efficient.
Exactly.
With time and systematic note taking. And I love this idea of a hybrid of doing things electronically and then also writing it out longhand, because we know research shows repetition is key for learning. And at your oral defense, you need to prove yourself. You need to provide evidence that you are an expert in this. And what better way to do it than have a systematic note-taking system that you start from the beginning of your program. If you're listening and you happen to have the lecture of being at the beginning, if not, that's okay. Start now, no time like the present. And then having that matrix, whether it's online, old school, or a mix, to prepare yourself for stepping into this role as a scholar practitioner, as the expert in your area.
Yeah. And having that hybrid it feeds into something else in research called this generation effect, where we're looking at material, but then now we're generating how we're going to remember it. And so we put that generation effect with the translation hypothesis, and we're giving our brain a really solid head start on retaining this material. And because our brain can't retain all of that material, our synthesis matrix is giving us an external storage place, an organized external storage place. So when we do go back into it and we're reviewing it, our brain is remembering, oh, that's right. Oh, that's how I'm connecting that. Our brain just starts making all of these great connections. And then it just becomes this, I don't want to say magical, but it really kind of is. When all of a sudden, all of these ideas just slam together and they start connecting, and you start seeing the world through this synthesis matrix. I have one student who was really struggling and finally did move towards this kind of a note-taking, tweaked to work for him. And then he went to work, and for the next couple of weeks, and then we met, and he just went, I'm now looking at the world through my conceptual framework, because that systematic way of note-taking helped him start connecting ideas. And it was really cool. The magic of connecting ideas from systematic note-taking. Yeah, you can look at the world in a whole different way.
Jen, you have given us such value in such a short period of time. If you aren't already taking notes, I am confident this podcast has convinced you to start. And before we sign off, do you have a favorite quote that you share with your students, or maybe some final words of wisdom?
Whenever I'm working with doctoral students, I have to channel Dr. Mary Rowe, who was my advisor when I graduated. And one of the biggest supports, I never would have made it through. In fact, she got me a rock as a gift. And I just kind of looked at her and she said, I know. She said, but I've never known anybody who could get through this as stoically as you did. And so you are a rock. And it ended up being like a little business card holder. So I still use it because it reminds me every day of Mary. She sat me down after my preliminary oral defense because she knew I was working full time. I'm a teacher. I've got 3 kids. And she said, only 50% of the students finish this process. It's up to you to decide which side of that 50 you want to be on. And at the moment I thought, that's really harsh. Like, does she not believe in me? And it was quite the opposite. She believed enough to give me the choice as to whether I was going to finish or not. So yeah.
Powerful.
It was super powerful. And I remember that every single thing I do where I'm questioning myself, okay, which side of this am I going to be on?
Well, stack the odds in your favor. Be on the side of the 50% who finish and start a systematic note-taking system now.
Absolutely.
Jen, thank you so much for being on today's show. I know it will be helpful to not only the student listeners, but also the faculty. So thanks again.
Thanks.
If you're enjoying the Happy Doc Student podcast, could I ask you a big favor? Would you be willing to rate, review, and subscribe? It would help me get noticed by more people like you, people who know there is a better way to navigate the doctoral process.
The Happy Doc Student Podcast is brought to you by expandyourhappy.com, and you can learn more there. One more thing. Just a quick reminder that the information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only.